I'm Bert Oliver, and welcome to this Views and News for today. Now, John, I hope I can introduce you correctly after that, Paw. John Ross, our local retired editor, will introduce our guest.
Thank you, Bert. Views and news, huh? Okay. Okay, Bert.
Get it corrected.
You know, it's news and views. CNN and was it CNBC, they all have their resident financial gurus. Well, we have ours. Making his second appearance on Bowie News and Views is Sera, who's a financial planner, and during his last appearance here, he correctly predicted what is happening now. So, Carlos, welcome.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, except for losing all that money in the market.
Okay. Join the crowd.
I'm sure. So kind of bring us up to date on what you see happening and where are we going to go from here?
Well, periods of volatility, like we've just had, are always followed by periods of boredom.
Okay.
So we can expect a lot of boredom, I'd say, for another 6 to 12 months. Meaning that if you're looking at boredom as the Dow Jones, which is now around the 8,500 level,
which is right around today.
Yeah, it was right around 8,500 back when we spoke. It rode down to 6,500. It's back to 85. You can probably see what you would call a tight trading range, somewhere between the 7,500 to 9,000 for quite some time now.
Okay.
That's a normal reaction that you get after a major blast like we had.
You think it'll ever get back up to 13,000?
Of course. I just don't know how old I'll be.
That's a good point. I probably will be in the big bank in the sky.
Right. No, of course it will.
Yeah.
Of course it will, especially on the Dow.
Well, are you optimistic about the future?
Always. Yeah. I mean, we live in a great country. I mean, it's just that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're very productive and, yes, optimistic.
Well, that's good. There are lots of folk out there who aren't, especially people who have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in their investments. They're retiring with no money. That's really scary. What would you say to people who are facing retirement or are retired now and they've lost all this money? You just stick with it or what?
Well, that's a hard question.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know.
On one end, if you don't have money, you can't retire. So it's almost a catch-22. They're not retiring. Trust me. If they don't have money, they're not retiring.
Yeah.
They're either working where they are, continuing, or they're getting another job, or they're lowering their standard of living. I mean, we have like for example, right now, we have 6 clients in our clientele that are taking money out of their IRAs or profit-sharing plans, and they're not retired.
Yeah.
We've never had this.
Really? Yeah.
25 years of managing money, we've never had situations where we have this many people, 35, 40, 45-year-olds, people that have been saving for retirement because they're unemployed or their wife is unemployed. Something's happened, and now they're having to pull money to make ends meet. So in terms of sticking with it, which is I guess the question that you asked, once money is lost, you can't dwell on the past. You have to focus on the present. And so my advice to those people is, do an evaluation of right now. What do you have? What's reasonable? And where do you go from here? So that's what I.
Well, what would you say to somebody who is say mid-40s, early 50s, who's lost this phenomenal amount of money? What do they do? What heaven's name do they do to try to recoup this money?
Well, for someone in that age group, which is more than likely an age group that's 10 to 20 years from retirement, they'll be fine. They just keep doing what they're doing, keep contributing.
The older people? The
older people should have not have been in that situation in the first place. Yeah. I don't know how do you define that, but if you go back and you analyze markets for the last 100 years, they have once every 30 years you're going to have a period where the market drops over 50%.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. So if you're 60, 65 years old and plan on living to 90, you will experience one of these.
Yeah.
And your advisor needs to know that you will experience one of these, and you have to plan accordingly. So if you were fully invested in the stock market at age 60 or 65 with what had to be your nest egg,
yes.
Well, you messed up. Shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually. I moved everything in a money market.
Good.
Every
Good. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's not
right.
something you should have that anyone should have been doing. Stocks are used as a method to grow your wealth.
Yes.
And once you're wealthy, you don't need to use them as much.
That's true. How about you, Bert? You're wealthy.
No, but I'm working on one of those things, which has 40 years old again.
Yeah, don't we all?
On those avenues you were thinking
Yes, we
about.
do.
But Carlos, and I understand it pretty well. The people that 401k seem to be the magic bullet for a lot of people to save money without getting advice. You can do that at your employer, because the employer usually have some plan for you, tied in with their retirement programs. And then choosing the right things was so important, and if you got the right advice, younger, you risk a little more, older, you risk less. Be sure it's there almost like a savings account of money market versus, in the stock market, of course. But let me ask you about this one thing that I haven't followed it lately. I'm just like, John's in good shape. I'm still hoping to have another few years of working. He's retired.
Okay.
You see. But the important thing is, how about the stocks that are primarily the assets are in Europe or out of the United States? Are they faring as well now as they were, or are they having the same problems?
They're pretty much, we've had a world contagion, if that's really what's
That's what
the
I'm-
best way of explaining it. The international markets have actually had a larger drop than the American markets.
They have.
Yeah. The U.S. market, if you look at the peak in October of 2007 to the trough, which some people would say was March of 2009, it was about a 58% drop in the S&P 500. The European markets, depending on which ones you look, were anywhere from 60 to 70%.
Look at Iceland.
Yeah, there's been some major disruptions there.
Sure.
And our subprime housing has kind of gone over there quite a bit. They were more dependent on housing and leverage than we were. It'll be a little bit longer for them to come out of this than us.
Cost of profit was greater for them than in their own market area. I'm sure a lot of them put money, I understand, into the American market, subprime mortgages. You think, Carlos, that really in the leisure approach to putting people in homes, and I'm going to name Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, control a great deal by the emphasis of politicians, our political situation. It was a nice thing to brag about. Everyone should own a home. I want everyone to have the privilege of owning a home. Do you think we press too much on that from the political side that may have caused them to take greater risk?
I don't. If you look at home ownership 30 years ago, when this first started coming up, it was like 63, 64% of people owned homes.
Sure.
At the peak here, it was 67, 68. It wasn't, if you were to attribute that, you're only talking about a very little amount, 3 or 4%. Yet the subprime market was almost 15% of the overall market. So you can't really, yes, the answer is yes, but not as much as everyone would like you to think it was.
Well, don't we blame the banks? They're the ones that were doing these idiotic subprime mortgages, for heaven's sake.
I actually do blame the banks.
Yeah, and now the arrogant folks are back to giving bonuses to their executives just like they were prior to this fiasco. That blows my mind. Blows my mind.
Well, I'm going to say one thing I think understand. People are paid a lot of times on a base salary plus the commission or bonus of production. It's just almost like it's an opposite than a guaranteed hourly wage for that hourly wage workers. And many times they'll hire someone in and prove what you can do. Life insurance companies, as you know, have done that forever. They bring people in, give them a guaranteed salary for a year until they produce, and then it comes down to a percentage of the business they produce. And if it produce well, life insurance used to be a great field at one time. Not only get a bonus, every time that person renews for 5 to 10 or even 15 years, that agent that started that customer originally still gets a little piece of the renewal over the years. And that's why the life insurance business was, I think, sold well, and yet one company got into a little bit of trouble with reselling a few years ago. So there's always a great deal of checks and balances on these things.
Well, wait a minute. What checks and balances?